Hey, this is Rachel McIntosh. I am the cryptocurrency editor at Finance Magnates, as well as the most regular host of the Finance Magnates Blockchain podcast. Recently, I interviewed Zeeshan Ferozwill, who's the CEO of Coinbase UK. We talked about the things that Coinbase is doing in the industry in terms of its new offerings for institutional investors, as well as the things that Coinbase is doing to influence regulations all around the world. Zeeshan is also going to be a speaker at the upcoming Finance Magnates London Summit that's going to be taking place at the Old Billingsgate from November 13th to 14th. It's a leading crypto and FX event, and we would absolutely love to see you there. Can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got involved with Coinbase UK?
Sure. I've been, I think my professional journey can best be described as having been in traditional finance for about 10 years.
Okay.
So I worked primarily for payments companies based out of Canary Wharf for the best parts of my life. So very traditional, moving money, e-commerce, that kind of thing. I took my first role with a fintech, a San Francisco-based fintech called Tilt a few years ago, and that was ultimately sold to Airbnb. And it was as part of that transition that an opportunity at Coinbase came up, which I decided to then take. It was actually interesting. Just before, about 2 months before the first rally we had at the start of 2017, I timed it quite well.
Good. So this year, Coinbase, both in the US and the UK, has made a lot of moves to reach out to institutional investors, like the launch of the custody service and the index fund and a few more things. Does this kind of signify a shift towards institutional investors and away for retail investors, or is this just an effort to make the sphere more inclusive as a whole?
It's the latter. So it definitely is not a shift away from retail users. And if anything, we continue to invest heavily in our retail proposition and products. So that very much, actually in some ways, remains a bread and butter product for us. But the institutional investments and products that we're looking at, they're very much driven by gaps in the market, and where we think we can build something that helps the ecosystem. So today there's a lot of, we built a custody product, which we think there was a gap for, and also talking about GDAX, our exchange, as an example, which has been split into 3 different parts, which is Pro, Coinbase Prime, and then our markets product. That was very much, GDAX outgrew very quickly and was serving a whole host of different types of users and use cases. And what we wanted to do was to provide a more tailored experience to the users and their expectations. So we decided to split it out depending on the types of users that access those platforms. So I think at a high level, the institutional space is a very, in some ways, it's even a younger space than the retail one. And us building products over there is responding to mostly customer demand.
Okay. And so how has it been going with these new institutional products? Like, what kinds of adoption? I don't know if you can give me numbers, or just what's the general attitude surrounding Coinbase's institutional products?
Sure, I think it's going really well. So at a high level, it's going very well. We're getting a lot of interest in, let's say, our custody product. We're actually going to be, I can't talk about it today, but we'll be talking more openly about the types of businesses we've taken on board in the first tranche. Actually, particularly in the first tranche, we had to restrict who we took on just so we could test the system out. So there's currently demand outstrips our ability to handle the volume that's coming in, but we're looking to scale that up very quickly. At a broad level, I think institutions, the decision-making process, and to start adding, say, crypto assets, something that they support, it's a longer decision cycle. So if you think about decisions that were perhaps made in Q4 last year or Q1, will start to materialize into actual products probably later this year. So we continue to see a very large amount of interest from partners in the institutional space, and we will, over the next few months, be rolling out and announcing some of these.
Okay, and I'm curious, like, have most of these partners and this interest come from the United States and from the UK and kind of Western Europe, or where are you seeing most of that interest coming from?
It's the US and mostly the EU as well.
Okay.
So we do get an interest from outside of these core markets, but we don't have the infrastructure to support them outside of here. The licenses, the payments infrastructure that's needed. So it is the UK is a key market for us. It's not as is some of the top countries in Europe, which include France, Italy, Spain, Netherlands, Switzerland for us. And so we're seeing a large amount of interest from there, as well as the US.
I see. And on that note, are there plans to develop the necessary regulatory and legal infrastructure for Coinbase in order to make it more inclusive of markets in Asia and in Africa and other parts of the world?
Absolutely. I mean, we opened our Japan office about 4 months ago. We've hired a general manager, or a rockstar general manager, to manage that market for us. I wish it was easy enough for us to pick a continent and say this is what that look like, but it's a very drawn out process where you talk to each individual regulator, sometimes several stakeholders within a region, and then get the outcomes you need. So we work with regulators both in the US and this side of the pond. It's actually a big part of what I do in terms of sharing best practices, sharing where we think this space can go, and we continue to do that outside of our core markets in Asia, and are looking to expand there.
Okay. And as as Coinbase is expanding its institutional offerings, as you said, like the institutional side of the cryptocurrency market is still kind of a young thing. I mean, the cryptocurrency markets in general are still very young, but there are a lot of exchanges and platforms coming into the space saying, hey, like we are offering custody services, we're offering all these things that institutional investors are looking for. What do you think that Coinbase has to offer that these other exchanges don't?
I think I'll start off by saying that I see a lot of this as really healthy activity for the space, because ultimately what we're trying to develop is a very new sector with completely brand new infrastructure that hasn't existed before. So the more businesses that attack it from different angles, they're growing the size of the pie rather than taking pieces of the pie from others. So at a high level, I think that's incredibly healthy. Where Coinbase, I believe, differentiates ourselves is we've always taken a very compliance-heavy, focused on our core principles around being the most trusted and the safest place and the easiest to use, from a crypto point of view. Those values transfer over to our institutional offering as well. In fact, this conversation is timely because only 2 days ago we published our institutional core principles. And they're again a development of what perhaps the retail and the business's core principles at a high level were, into what we'd like to offer institutional businesses. And at a high level, there's 5 principles we talked about. Number 1 was we will operate a fair and orderly market. Number 2 was institutional grade infrastructure and processes. Number 3 is to enforce a transparent market. So create rules and governance around it. Number 4 was fair access to all market participants. And number 5 was publicly disclose our listing practices and our market rules. So what we're trying to do, and I think what differentiates us, is our transparency and our focus on building reliable, trusted infrastructure.
Okay. So Coinbase, I guess, kind of, you could say, bet on the 5 biggest cryptocurrencies when it was launched, and then later adopted Bitcoin Cash and XRP as well. Now that the cryptocurrency markets, and especially these high market cap cryptocurrencies, have kind of been slowly diving throughout the year, and you see a little bit more volatility and a little bit more upward action in some of the other altcoins. What is Coinbase's kind of attitude towards that? I mean, is there, looking at the way that the markets are moving, is there a possibility that Coinbase could add some of these more volatile but maybe not as high market cap coins? Or will you stick with the tried and true?
The first thing is we didn't necessarily bet on the 5 coins. It was a conscious decision to be selective about the coins that we list, and there's reasoning behind that. But I will also say that, interestingly, if you look at the market cap and the share some of the top coins have, particularly Bitcoin, it's actually gone up over the last few months. So a lot of the old coins have been perhaps more volatile in that sense, but Bitcoin and some of the main ones have demonstrated a bit more stability in the recent environment. So listing assets for us is a incredibly thoughtful process. It at its core puts the customer's needs and interests as a primary driver, and then we look at other aspects that go into it. We actually published last year, around December time, something called the Digital Asset Framework, and that was designed to share publicly and to help people understand how we make those decisions and how to distinguish perhaps a good project with one that still is in early stages of development. And so, what you have seen and what you will see in the future from us when it comes to adding more assets is we look at the project itself, we look at liquidity in the market, we look at customer demand, the teams behind it, the maturity of the product, and that's when we'll make a decision on whether it's a good fit for us to list or not. A lot of it's also down to protecting the consumer. Perhaps in some cases, it's no secret that there's been a lot of projects that have been scammed, frankly speaking.
Yeah.
So I think part of our responsibility as in an attempt to be the most trusted place is to try and only offer assets that we've done thorough due diligence on. And one aspect that I guess is also often not talked about as much is listing an asset for us is slightly harder in the sense that we have to, because of how we operate, we have to get regulatory approval. So every time we list assets, we have over 40 money transmission licenses in the US, so we need to get approvals for those from those regulators. We have relationships, banking partners, we share that and get approvals around that. So we have insurance on our assets, and then add the technical aspects around building secure vaults and the hot and cold storage infrastructure. It means that adding an asset is a significant investment, a very time-consuming investment, and one that we certainly will be making more of, just because there is a consumer demand for more assets.
Right. So speaking of what was it called? The institutional core principles that you publish, as well as the guidelines for listing an asset that were published in around December of last year. Those things, a lot of people in the cryptocurrency community have said have helped set standards for other parts of the crypto community, and making retail investors and investors in general more aware of what these guidelines should look like has also put pressures on other exchanges and platforms to kind of improve their standards, or at least make them more transparent. Is Coinbase part of any self-regulating body in the cryptocurrency industry, like Crypto UK or the Winklevoss's Virtual Commodity Association or anything like that?
I think if I start with our approach and principle in general, that is to foster a healthy crypto ecosystem. And our transparency and us sharing our decision-making process was intended to help drive that, whether it be at the consumer level or other players in the space. So we support and interact with, particularly here in the UK, with a lot of self-regulatory bodies, including Crypto UK. We were one of the original members, founding members for that, as well as a lot of great work that's being done by the likes of GDF, for example. So ultimately, my goals and ambitions here in Europe, particularly, are around creating those standards, creating those operating principles for businesses, and weeding out practices that may impact consumers negatively in general. And very supportive of any organization that's working towards that. And we will offer, and that includes also regulators. So you have, I think, the first stage is self-regulation in the absence of any government, set regulatory framework. But the next stage is to work with the likes of, say, the FCA or the Crypto Asset Task Force we've got in the UK, or ESMA's Crypto Asset Task Force as well. So there's a lot of different regulators having these conversations, and we try and support as many of them as we can.
Yes, and so has and I'm assuming that this is the case. So has Coinbase then been interacting with the Crypto Asset Task Force directly and the FCA directly? And if so, what kinds of interactions have those been? Like, had conversations or, yeah?
I think what the several task forces are doing at the minute is to try and really wrap their heads around how what this space is and how to regulate it. So I'm often finding that they are starting with a taxonomy as such, where they start to classify assets in one category or another. FINMA's framework was one starting point for that, for example, where we had 3 different categories that they came out with. I'm finding that the approach is similar in terms of understanding what an asset actually is, what it feels, smells, acts like, and then to build then to make a decision about, well, this is how we should regulate it. And our inputs at different levels, both with, say, ESMA or in the UK, we have a joint task force between the Treasury, the FCA, and the Bank of England. So we've interacted with those and some local regulators within mainland Europe as well, to help provide input into that process wherever we can.
Okay, so do you think that this trend of self-regulatory bodies is actually effective in these interactions with the government in Europe, and maybe you also have some insight as to the United States as well?
Absolutely. I think it's such a fluid and fascinating new space that there's a lot to learn and understand, and the worst outcome here could be, a regulatory framework that stifles innovation in this space. So a self-regulatory body is a great starting point to share with the regulators the principles in terms of what good regulation or what regulation may look like. So it often serves as a starting point, and then it can be intertwined with existing regulatory frameworks in those spaces.
I see, yeah. And so you see regulation in the UK and maybe other parts of Europe and the United States going kind of in a healthy direction then? Yeah.
Certainly. I think in conversations I've had with regulators over here, to be honest, I've been it's been refreshing. I've been surprised by how well they've understood and how well researched they are in terms of this space. So I think, thankfully, we most likely will end up with frameworks that are conducive to businesses operating in the UK and in the rest of Europe.
How do you think that, provided when this healthy regulatory framework is established, how do you think that will affect the cryptocurrency industry and markets?
I think at a starting point, it will create a clear divider between businesses that perhaps have practices that aren't acceptable. So it will serve as in some ways, a differentiator between what a good or a bad business should look like. But once you have that, and I don't think the regulation needs to be onerous. I think these standards are necessary for a healthy ecosystem. I think what that will do is it should boost the space because, if you look at Coinbase as an example, we have millions of customers in Europe and we handle billions of euros and pounds every year. But there is no regulation as such that covers that crypto space. So, it's a very, and if you look at the industry in general, it's actually remarkable that this entire space is operating without any controls. So having those controls will start to legitimize the space in many ways. And I'm not saying it's not legitimate today, but having an official regulatory endorsement will help drive that forward. And actually, it particularly helps with institutions because on the consumer side, you'll have consumer protection and all the securities that are baked in. But from an institutional point of view, in many ways, most institutions can't invest in assets or work with businesses that don't meet a certain regulatory standard or have licenses that they require. So being able to be regulated will help institutions be more willing to work, to step into this space.
Yeah, and do you think that will also bring in new retail investors and maybe change the way that people use cryptocurrency? Because right now, the Bitcoin network is, people bought Bitcoin maybe sometime last year and are either rejoicing or suffering greatly as a result of it. Do you think that these high market cap, very popular cryptocurrencies will regain the kind of volatility or the kind of, and not necessarily volatility, but the value that they had? Or do you think that things will just kind of continue in this direction of stability?
I think things will continue. In fact, this will catalyze more stability in this space because the more money you have moving in, it's easy to move a $200 billion market, but it isn't that easy to move a $2 trillion market, for example. So I think the more a regulated industry that attracts more institutional capital and more retail investors will ultimately have much deeper liquidity, which results in less volatility. So, and I think that's where you'll start to see attitudes shift from, Bitcoin and some of these assets being an investment product to actually really exploring the underlying use cases around utility. And that's a core focus of ours. A lot of the moves we've made in terms of the product and the acquisitions, they've all been around driving utility in this space. Ultimately, investment is one aspect of it. And I think a lot of people dived into this space for the investment. But if there's one silver lining for that, it is that they end up actually using it as a utility in some way, shape, or form.
Right. There's also been kind of a trend with some of the larger exchanges in the cryptocurrency space towards decentralization. And of course, Vitalik Buterin said a couple months ago that I think centralized exchanges should burn in hell. What do you think about this trend? And are there any plans for Coinbase to introduce a decentralized platform?
There are. We actually bought a exchange called Paradex, decentralized exchange, a few months ago. So I think there's a space in the world for both centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. As a fiat on-ramp, when you have to work with banks which need to comply with regulation, you need a centralized exchange. You need someone who's able to KYC their customers and to hold their customers accountable for the flow of funds, keep money laundering and terrorist financing and all those activities off the platform. And for that, you need a centralized exchange. Without that, it will be impossible to have on and off ramps into fiat and crypto. But I think decentralized exchanges actually, when you don't need that fiat ramp, they serve a purpose. They take away that element of a centralized party and can operate in a far more trustless environment. So I think what you'll find is there are horses for courses, as they say. Decentralized exchanges definitely have a place. There is. I will also say that there is maturity to be. These decentralized exchanges need to mature over time. Like all of the transactions in these exchanges are on chain, And as we know, a lot of these networks have bandwidth issues. So I think as the ecosystem matures, we'll start to see more volume and use cases for decentralized exchange.
Okay. So Coinbase is actually one of the firms that's hired more women as C-level executives than many other cryptocurrency firms. And there's been a lot of coverage on the fact that like there aren't so many women in the cryptocurrency space, both as executives and innovators and also as traders. Was Coinbase's decision to hire these women an effort? Was it intentional, or was it just a matter of who the most talented person in the room was?
I think there's no question that the people we've hired are the most talented people we've found for that role. So they are, once again, absolute rock stars in what they do. And I work with quite a few of them. So, no question that they were the most talented. Having said that, we have made an effort to uncover people, uncover women who are best suited to these roles. And I think it's something that in the crypto community in general is an issue. It's a more male-dominated industry, and we're investing. There's working groups within Coinbase where we look at how we can encourage more women to join the space. We attend events as well to encourage that. So I think there's on our part, there has been an effort, a focused effort to make sure we raise a balanced and healthy organization in that sense.
Absolutely. And these efforts, when you mentioned you attend these events, are these more recruiting events, or these events that are also geared toward getting more female traders into the space?
I refrain from using the word traders, but I think it's more about they are educational. So I think there's an element of this is easy. It may look scary from the outside, but actually once it's not that hard to grasp. So educational, and the other angle is recruitment as well. So we want to reach out to the most talented people out there, to the most talented women out there to come and venture into something like crypto, which, frankly speaking, in some ways, at least a year ago, was considered a high-risk move, although more people have moved into that space, are more willing to move into that space now. It's a bit of both, and to be honest, it extends beyond women as well. It's about just having a diverse workforce, and we try and focus on events that cover other angles of diversity too.
Absolutely. Are there any efforts, or do you have any thoughts about, I guess, getting more women into the space as retail investors and traders?
It's funny you said that. I was reading an article yesterday about actually a lot of women are starting to trade as a hobby at home. I think it absolutely is. Part of our educational efforts are about educating people into the benefits of crypto. Again, I refrain from the trading angle of it. So this is not a invest in this and make some money. But I think there's an opportunity for people to understand what this is and how it can be used. Particularly from a utility point of view. So we definitely focus on the educational aspect around that.
Absolutely. So Coinbase is one of the most well-known, if not maybe the most well-known cryptocurrency firm in the world, inside and out of the crypto community. So just kind of in a very general sense, if you could give me a TLDR version of like what you think that Coinbase is trying to do, and what does it really represent for this industry and for the world?
I think what we set out to do was to operate in a few years ago what perhaps was in some ways was a more murkier space. We set out to build a business that was open, transparent, trusted, and was easy to use. I think those were the main differentiators. What we ultimately want to do is take crypto to the masses. We want people to be able to, I think there's financial freedom that comes with it. I think it creates a more open financial system, and that is our that is our goal as a business. It's the one that unites all of our businesses. So we continue to focus on building a open, transparent, global financial system that anyone can access and participate in.
Absolutely. Do you have any announcements for Coinbase or anything that you'd like to share about the roadmap for the next year?
We have a lot of exciting stuff coming on. It has been an amazing year so far. I feel like we've managed to announce almost something new every week or every other week this year. We do quarterly reviews in the business. We're looking back at the quarter and the number of businesses we've acquired, the new products that were launched, and the investments that we made through Coinbase Ventures was absolutely. We were very proud of that progress, and I think we will continue to do that over the next year and beyond. I think. I don't have any specific announcements around that, but I think what the areas we'll continue to focus on is around driving utility and actually potentially education as well. I think there's a gap in terms of helping consumers with clear, unbiased information, bite-sized information that's easy to understand around different assets. So we continue to focus on the educational side of it as well as things that help drive utility.
Zeeshan, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.